Alright, welcome back and thanks for tuning in to another episode of barSILENCE. My name is Jameson, and I'm your host. barSILENCE is a Superpod Network production that's dedicated to exploring the very best video game music in each episode. If you haven't yet, head over to barSILENCE.com to find an easy link to subscribe on whatever your favorite podcatcher is. You can also go to superpodnetwork.com to catch this show and other great indie gaming podcasts covering games from the past, present, and everywhere in between. And of course, if you're looking for the best, 24/7 around-the-clock video game music radio station, you should check out 8 Beats Radio. This show plays there live on the first Tuesday of every other month, and you can tune in by going to 8beats.co. In this episode, we're going to be listening to the ultra-cool techno sounds of the music from the Atari Jaguar game Defender 2000. Before we get into that game though, let's go back a bit further to the golden age of the arcades. In the 1970s, Williams Electronics had released a few video games into arcades, but it was the horizontally scrolling shooter Defender in 1981 that was their first breakout hit. Like many arcade games of the time, it was simple to pick up, but challenging to master. As you fly your ship across a horizontal landscape left or right, the goal is to shoot down alien enemies and protect astronauts from being abducted, all while racking up as high a score as possible. Now, Defender wasn't the first game to be a side-scrolling shooter. That honor actually goes to Sega's Bomber. But it was the first to allow side-scrolling in both directions, wrapping all the way around and extending the boundary of gameplay beyond just one single frame. Its success helped to start a genre that would go on to include other hits like Xevious, Gradius, R-Type, and plenty of others. The game would eventually go on to outperform Asteroids by spring of 1981, and become one of the most important games of its era. Yet, despite that, the Defender name wouldn't actually return in any meaningful way for well over a decade. Things finally started moving again in the mid-90s when Atari partnered with Williams to reimagine a selection of their arcade classic games for the Atari Jaguar as well as PCs. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, the Atari Jaguar came out in 1993, landing right after the 16-bit era of the Super Nintendo and right before the 32-bit generation that started with the Sega Saturn. The system was marketed as the first 64-bit console, though technically it actually ran on two 32-bit processors. So while it was hyped for its graphical potential, the system actually ended up struggling to compete with its 16-bit peers who were ultimately at the peak of their time. And because of that, it never ended up really gaining any traction due to lack of third-party support, which unfortunately kinda sealed its fate. Now, the first game from this partnership to be released and become the system's first great hit game was the tube-sliding shooter Tempest 2000 that was developed by English game designer and hero to Jaguar fans Jeff Minter. By the holiday season of 1995, almost 2 years later, the Jaguar was down to $150 a pop and still selling slowly. The end was near, and Atari was looking for another breakout hit. So Jeff Minter and his team at Lamasoft were tasked with bringing Defender into the new millennium with Defender 2000. The first drafts of the game actually came together pretty quick, but the anxious leadership at Atari pushed back, asking for something more visually impressive than the minimalist wireframe aesthetics of the past. They wanted larger sprites, more realistic-looking graphics, and parallax scrolling backgrounds this time. These of course were all features that they felt were necessary to meet the expectations of mid-90s gamers and showcase that the Jaguar was a system still worth buying. Now, according to the instruction manual for Defender 2000, the plot of the game places you in a future where the Earth's natural resources are more or less completely depleted. This forces humanity to mine life-sustaining materials from the asteroid belt. In the game, you play as a member of the system defense team, piloting the Advanced Threshold ship. Your mission: defend the mining colonies and their workers from persistent and seemingly endless attacks by the Alpha Proximian Empire. To bring that battle into the hands of gamers, Defender 2000 offers 3 different ways to play the game. First was the classic Defender mode, which was a faithful recreation of the original. Then there was Defender Plus, which was a modernized version with updated visuals and controls. And of course, there's the namesake Defender 2000, which was a fully upgraded version that Atari wanted, with new enemies, power-ups, bonus rounds, and over 100 levels. By the time that Defender 2000 came out in February of 1996, critics had a range of opinions, as well as expectations. The classic Defender mode was one of the most highly praised aspects of the game. Atari World referred to it as a near-perfect replica of the original. Computer and Video Games magazine gave the game an 83, claiming that it was a decent follow-up to Tempest 2000, but it was nowhere near as cool. Even Jeff Minter later admitted that it was an inferior game to Tempest 2000, feeling that he couldn't make the version he truly wanted due to the expectations that Atari had for the game. Even with all that, one of the most consistently praised aspects of the game was its awesome techno soundtrack. English composer and sound designer Alastair Lindsay, who helped to create the incredible soundtrack to Tempest 2000, was brought back by Magitech's development team to create the music for Defender 2000. He went on to have credits in games like Team Buddies, The Getaway, and Until Dawn, just to name a few. Now, the interesting thing that I did learn though, is that this Alastair Lindsay is not the same one who worked at Rare. That Alastair Lindsay has credits on Jet Force Gemini and Roller Coaster Tycoon 3. This of course made researching these composers a little bit tricky. Either way, it appears that being named Alastair Lindsay seems to come with the built-in natural talent for making excellent video game music. Now, when people look back at the Atari Jaguar's legacy, Tempest 2000's soundtrack often gets the spotlight, and for good reason. As one of the system's first must-own titles, its fast-paced, hyper-modern techno music established a coolness factor that helped shape the brand promise of what the Jaguar could potentially be. Defender 2000, in contrast, arrived late in the Jaguar's life at a time when the system was struggling and on the verge of being discontinued. Its soundtrack kinda mirrors that moment, offering a grittier, darker techno sound that's punctuated with rapid-fire breakbeats, ravey piano stabs, and distorted guitars. So while it may live in the shadow of Tempest 2000, I think it's fair to say that it stands on its own as a killer 90s techno-inspired soundtrack that's well worth a listen. Interestingly, I learned that Defender 2000's soundtrack never received a proper album release, but I was able to track down a high-quality version that apparently is rumored to have come from the once-planned CD version of the game. So for this episode, we're going to celebrate Defender 2000's legacy and listen to a DJ-style mix that I've put together. If you want to see info like track names, check the show notes for those details. Alright, are you ready? Let's hop into the threshold and blast our way into the new millennium with the awesome techno beats of Defender 2000. Enjoy this mix, and I'll be back after that. That's the show. I hope you enjoyed this techno-fueled and Y2K compliant soundtrack to Defender 2000. If you would interact with the show and tell me what you think about my selections in this episode, you can follow me on a variety of social media platforms. That includes Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram. Following the show in those locations are exactly where you can get show updates, see great screenshots, artwork, music clips, and various information about the games that are featured in each episode. Check the show notes to follow along on your favorite platform of choice. If you're enjoying this show's selection of incredibly great video game music, please consider taking a moment to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever you're listening to this show, because I'd really love to hear what you think. Don't forget, you can go to barSILENCE.com to listen to past shows if you missed any. And of course, if you're feeling giving, you can always support barSILENCE on Patreon. For already subscribing, I want to thank the members of the Legion of VGM for supporting the show. Zoe, Alusa, Cameron, Reptile, and Poppy the Maskeeton, you Hiscore heroes are the best, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Now, if you want to join the System Defense team and become a member of the Legion of VGM, you can subscribe for as little or as much as you want. Be sure to check those show notes for a link to learn more. I would also like to thank friends of the show and Legion members, Aaron of the excellent video game variety podcast Super Ghost, as well as Professor Tom of the Shujin Academy VGM Club. You can and should check out both of these shows wherever you find your podcast, as well as on TerraPlayer.com. Alright, like always, I have some great music to end this show with. Now that we've heard the full CD quality sounds of the Defender 2000 soundtrack, we're going to switch gears a bit and listen to a couple of tracks that come from the game rep. For this set, I've blended together 2 tracks that come from the game's bonus level and game over screen. We'll begin with the kinda crazy dance remix of Beethoven's Fifth that comes from the bonus level, and then we're going to smash cut right into the digi-techno beats of Hiscore. Honestly, I think you're really going to like these, and if you do, I definitely encourage you to check out the rest of this version of the soundtrack for some really compressy techno-tune goodness. Anyway, that's all for now. Enjoy this final set of tunes, and as always, thanks again for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
Sorry about that.